Good afternoon, all. This is the Wednesday, September 9th, 2020 edition of the Freight Transportation Advisory Committee. It's our first meeting that we've had in a couple of months after July and August being off for various reasons and such. Back in June, we had 2 meetings, if you all remember. I think it was. So we're actually, either way, I lost track of my train of thought. We're all back here for this meeting here in September. First thing I just wanted to go over the rules of engagement for not only the refresher for the members of the FTAC, but also any of the presenters or anybody listening in or watching into the meeting who would like to participate in such. As it says on the screen, this is a public meeting as you recorded. The number of the technological assistance is listed on the screen for Lisa Wan, both her phone number and her email address. So if you want to write that down, just in case you may need to contact her during the meeting because you've lost signal or you're not able to speak or things like that. During the meeting, everybody's going to be on mute with the exception of whoever is doing the presentation. So there's no background noise and as such. And then we'll at the end of each presentation, we'll open up the mics for public comments, so therefore you can come back and forth. Because normally when we're in a meeting, we're all in one room and we can see each other and see when somebody's trying to say something in advance, so we know to go ahead to them. That's not possibility now because we're on screen. So we're gonna have to, as a result, we have to try to have each person talk one at a time. And as you can see, it says if you want to make a comment, use the raise hand button. You know, once it gets flowing, we might not need to use the raise hand button because we'll be able to have an idea of who's going to be talking and such. Now, when we do the roll call, whether it be for attendance or voting for a motion or resolution, because we cannot see each other, I'll call your name. And you have to physically, respond and say a nay, or whatever the action is needed. So we have it here for the visual and audio record. All right. With that, we can go ahead to the next slide, Lisa. And I'm going to go ahead and call the meet to order. And the meeting time is 2:05 p.m. And Barbara, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin. I want to thank everybody up from the committee joining us today. First thing we want to do before we start is go ahead and review. Actually, no, because I believe we have some new members, right, Kevin? So what I want to do is, I know it's going to be a little difficult, but I'd like to see if we can go around I don't know how, around the screen maybe or something like that, so that each of us can introduce. So what I would like to do is I'm going to go ahead and call the names of the committee members that are currently online, or I'm going to just call your name, and if you can go ahead and just introduce yourself, that way we can follow. Everybody gets a chance, not talking over each other, and then Kevin, if you can go ahead and, since you can see who's on as guests, to go ahead so we can know who's on the call with us today and on the meeting. So I am Barbara Pimentel. I am your chairperson for FTAC. So I want to take this opportunity and introduce our committee members for those that are new to the committee or new to the friends of the committee. My pleasure now to introduce, and I'm just going to call your name Juan, so he can go ahead.
Juan Flores, not to be confused with Lisa Juan. Juan Flores, Vice Chair. I report into everything Barbie Pintel tells me to do, and that's pretty much it.
That's it. That's all you need to do.
That's all I need to know.
That's it. That's it.
I take orders.
Okay. Bill, is Bill there?
No, he's not here as of yet.
Here. Okay. Is George online yet?
No, neither.
Okay.
They're still not here, either one.
Okay, John.
I am John Dahm, Infinity Commercial Real Estate and Florida Transatlantic Consulting.
Thank you. Is Willie online?
Yes, I am. Hi, Willie Maurer. Director of Transportation and Logistics for Costa Farms. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Willie. How are you doing? Stanley, you're online?
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Stanley Rigaud with Miami-Dade Beacon Council.
Great. Now I'm going to introduce our new member to the committee, which her name is Rosie Martinez. So I'm excited that we actually have a new seat filled. So keep in mind, people, if you have anybody that might be interested or you feel it's going to be a good fit for the committee, I encourage you to please submit their resumes over to Kevin. And Rosie, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, folks. Rosie Martinez, recently being appointed by Commissioner Joe Martinez, and eager to jump on board with the good group. Thank you.
Just a little bit about Rosie. She didn't go into too much, but I'm going to be loudmouth and say, she is former TSA, so she is a TSA former inspector. So she has like 9 years under her belt. So regarding regulations and compliance, so she's really versed in the industry, and she's very well. And she's also worked for forwarders and brokers, so she's very, very in tune with what goes on in the logistics and freight community. So if you have any TSA questions, you can offline, you can talk to her. I think she's like $200 an hour as a consultant or something like that. Just kidding. All right. Well, Kevin, I'm going to introduce it to you, or if you can give us a recap of who we have, because we don't see, unfortunately, our friends of the committee, just so we do our normal intro to everybody. Here.
So you want to know who's presenting, or you want to know all the other attendees?
Well, just if there's anybody that's never been, because we have, like, Rosie's her first time, so it's just to have an idea of who we get on as guest of the committee, and just so she can get familiar with what the committee, who we have.
Gotcha. All right, so we have two other members of the committee, that being George Corzo from Medley, and William Billarata. He's appointed by our school board member. And then usually for the meetings, we'll have individuals from certain agencies like City of Doral and some of the local businesses who are there each time. So you'll see those on a regular basis. And then they would, in this case, in the virtual world, they'll be listed as the attendees as opposed to the panelists. The panelists are the ones who are going to be doing the presentations, and the respective members. Speaking of which, Juan, can you hear me? Oh, sorry, not Juan, Carlos. My mistake. Carlos, can you hear me?
The esteemed Carlos Castro, that is.
Yes.
Carlos?
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry about that.
Who was the person you said was going to be coming on? Was it Jack Schnettler?
Jack Schnettler from Atkins.
Okay, so then Lisa, Jack Schnettler is currently under the attendees. So if you want to switch him over to the panelist section. All right, thank you. All right.
Okay.
All right, and with that, you can go back to you, Barbie, for the approval of the agenda.
Thank you so much. Okay, committee members, we first need a vote for approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
I move to approve the agenda.
Thank you, John. Do I get a second?
I second it. Willie?
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. On to the next item. Your approval of the minutes for those that were in attendance to the last meeting of June. If you've had a chance to review the minutes and any comments about them or any changes or amendments need to be made. If not, I can get an approval. I can get a motion for approval.
I approve it.
Thank you. Can I get a second on that?
I'll second.
Thank you so much. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Right, and
perfect. So
Sorry, Willie, you're the one who did the motion?
yes, I think
Okay.
it was Willie's voice. Yep.
All right.
Okay. All right, perfect. So next item on our agenda, any public comments? Anybody on the committee have any information that's pertinent to the industry that would like to share at this time? Nope. All right. All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda. We have our first presentation today for the South Florida SEFTC Southeast Florida 2045 Regional Transportation Plan. And I'm going to apologize. I'm not going to try to say the first. Edmondson is the last name with Miami-Dade TPO. I apologize. I don't want to say it wrong. So you can go ahead and tell me how you say your first name.
Thank you, thank you. Appreciate you guys having me, first of all. I just want to make sure, can everyone hear me? Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Yes, so my name is Tawari Edmondson, and don't worry, it's hard to pronounce. Trust me, coming up here, I've dealt with that my whole life. So, Tawari Edmondson, and I'm a transportation planner with the TPO. I act as the TPO liaison to the FTAC, and what that is, that's the Southeast Florida Transportation Council. And I'm just here today to present the most recent document that was adopted by that council, which is the 2045 Regional Transportation Plan. So next slide, please. Now, to just give a little background of what is the FTAC. The FTAC is the Southeast Florida Transportation Council, and it's a formal partnership of the 3 MPOs all within the US Census designated Miami urbanized area. And you can see the map to the right. So our area contains the Palm Beach MPO, the Broward MPO, and the Miami-Dade MPO. And I don't know about you guys, but me personally, I know I live in Broward, I work in Miami, sometimes I socialize in Palm Beach. So, it just shows that it's a very connected region, and it just shows that it just highlights the importance of coordinating our future transportation plans. When we're driving around and going to school or work or leisure, we don't know where the county line ends. So we want to make sure that all our transportation plans are coordinated. And this is really the main reason for even this group and why it exists. And to give it a little more background, is so on the FTAC board is represented by each of the MPOs. As I said, 1 member of each MPO is represented on the FTAC, and they meet between 2 to 4 times per year. Next slide, please. Now, functions of the FTAC. The FTAC really serves as a forum for policy coordination, and it undertakes the regional planning efforts. Now, what this include? This includes the approval of the regional network map. This really define what constitute a regional trip. And then we also prioritize transportation projects in the urbanized area for the Transportation Regional Incentive Program. This is a TRIP program if you're not familiar. So this program is a dedicated fund source for regional TRIP projects. And we're the body that prioritizes these projects to see, which projects get funded. We also have a regional public involvement process. And then one of the main documents we produce, which is what I'm here to present today, is a regional long-range transportation plan. Next slide, please. Now, so the first thing we wanted to come up with for this RTP was our RTP vision, our 2045 RTP vision.
Tawari, you're muted. Something happened to your...
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go. We can hear you now.
Thank you. Is this the last slide I was on before I got muted?
Yes,
okay.
Correct.
Yes, so just to recap. So our 2045 RTP vision, we want to create a shared regional transportation document that identifies the regional needs, our funding policies that really serve and benefit the entire Southeast region. So what this really does is this builds on the respective LRTPs. This creates a unified voice for the region. And the document is really aimed at being a call to action to really diversify our current mobility approach and really connect to our land use planning. Next slide, please. So the document was really structured to ask really difficult questions and to even come up with even more difficult answers. With limited land use, limited financial resources, we kind of really need to be very efficient in what we currently have. So important questions such as, how do we move a growing population? How do we spend our limited transportation dollars? Do we have the infrastructure that we need to move the needle? So this is what we want to really go about answering these questions within this document. Next slide, please. Now, so steps to creating this plan, and just so the team knows, all of these steps, there's technical memoranda completed for all of these steps of the RTP. So the first thing we went over is we had to define what, as a region, what were our goals, objectives, and measures of effectiveness. What are the best practices for transit supportive regions? And the RTP team looked at all the respective LRTPs to really synthesize what these objectives and goals would be. And of course, we have to define the regional multimodal corridor networks. You know, as a regional body, we have to define what constitutes a regional trip. What are the waterways? What are the railways? What are the roadways? What are the transportation hubs? What are these facilities that constitute a regional trip? You know, we looked into the legislative and funding framework of the region. And then we wanted to take on a scenario planning and a transit propensity effort. Now, what this is we looked at various high capacity transit futures, and we looked at the land use and TOD planning to complement these investments. You know, we looked at the financial resources that were available to the region, and then we used travel demand modeling to really get the tangible effects of what these different scenarios may produce. Next slide, please. So the first step, you know, goals and objectives and the performance measures. The first step of creating this plan. As I said, the team really, they looked at all the plans, you know, the Miami-Dade LRTP goals, the Broward LRTP goals, the Palm Beach LRTP goals, and they synthesized this. And what we saw is that there was a theme of sustainability and quality of life. And we wanted to define goals and measures that address, you know, multimodal system and land use, you know, the health and environment and safety, the economy, equity and public support. Next slide, please. Now, what are some of the major issues that we're facing as a region? So I'd say one of the first thing we need to look at is the growing population. You know, by 2045, we're looking at a 30% growth. We're expecting 7.5 million more people in this region by 2045. And of course, you know, this is going to mean, you know, more congestion, a lot more strain on our infrastructure, or transit infrastructure, you know, more pollution. And it's a litany of other things that we're going to need to address. Another thing we need to look at is the mismatch investments. So recently you can see that there's been a priority in our region for transit projects, you know, for, you know, transit projects, you know, complete street projects. However, when we looked at all the cost feasible plans, we found that only 14% of projects in the cost feasible plan had dedicated funding dedicated to complete streets projects, you know, transit projects, system management projects. So this really highlights the disconnect in what we're allowed to spend our money on and what we really have as regional needs and transit wants. And then I'd say the last thing that we need to address is the limited access. If we really follow our status quo or, you know, our current land development patterns, it's really not transit promotive. So following the status quo, you're going to see in the analysis that by 2045, only 5% of people will have access to high capacity transit from where they live, and 10% of people will have access to high capacity transit from where they work by 2045. And this is, I don't think this is where we want to head as a region, especially where we're growing. Next slide, please. So to take a further dive into the scenarios. So how we go into about these scenarios is the FTAC, which is the Regional Technical Advisory Committee, which is a subcommittee of the FTAC. They devised a couple of conceptual plans of what the future may look like. So we looked at the high capacity transit needs for the region. You know, what regional scale transit services may be needed, you know, to connect the region. You know, we looked at the growth and development patterns. Not only how much growth, but we wanted to look at where can this density, you know, where can we gear this growth with the right policies to ensure that we get the most out of these high capacity transit investments. And then of course, we wanted to look at the financial and legislative framework. We wanted to look at, hey, you know, what do we need to get to where we want to go? What is that's going to cost us? And, you know, what new revenue sources or what flexible sources can we use in order to get to that goal? And what you can see here in this graphic to the side is you can see the 3 scenarios tested and then the degree of change from the trend. Next slide, please. Now to even further take a deeper dive into the 3 different scenarios, we have the trend, which as I said, you know, it's business as usual, an emphasis on the SIS, you know, the highway, you know, existing transit service. Then our next scenario that we wanted to look at is there's a regional transit, is if we could flex some of the funds, because, you know, we're built out. Miami-Dade, the region is almost built out. If we could flex some of these funds that are designated to just roadway projects to what we want, which is transit projects, you know, and all in a regional scale, you know, put high capacity transit on the major corridors connecting the region. You know, we wanted to see what the effects on the traveling public would be. And then alternative growth is, we have the same regional transit that we had in the previous scenario, but we wanted to have land use changes. We wanted to have policies that promote land use changes that can put at least 75% of the future population and jobs around these regional transit corridors that we're going to look at defining. Next slide, please. Now, so when we test these various scenarios with the travel demand model, what did we find? So if we follow the trend scenario, you know, the status quo, what we're doing right now, by 2045, we're looking at 5% of people having access to high capacity transit from where they live, and 10% of people having access to high capacity transit from where they work. With the regional transit scenario, you know, where we have a more emphasis on regional transit, we can see that 20% of people, 25% of people have access to high capacity transit from where they live, and up to 40% of people have access to high capacity transit from where they work. Now, if you add land use and transit oriented development on top of that high capacity transit network, we can see that 35% of people have access to high capacity transit and 50% of people from where they work, from where they live and work respectively. Next slide, please. Yeah, so now I've been going over, you know, this transit, you know, where we want to go, what we want to do as a region, what we're prioritizing. But then, as I said, we did take a look at all the cost feasible plans. And to really highlight the disconnect is when look what this graph is showing is that of all the cost feasible plans, only 14% of funding is dedicated to complete street, system management, and transit projects. So still 76% of the funds are dedicated to roadway projects. And this is just something that we want to have at least some flexibility in our region to say, you know what, with the formulas that are defined, we want to be able to say, we want to flex some of these funds, you know, maybe to transit or for other uses. Next slide, please. Now we're almost at the bullseye. So, you know, between the Tri-Rail extension to downtown Miami, you know, the smart plan that we have going on, the complete streets and policies guidelines, I think we are making very good strides, great strides towards achieving the vision. All right, so we're getting to the RTP vision of where we want to go. Next slide, please. But as I said, this document, what we really wanted to do is for this document, the main purpose for this document is a call to action. You know, we want to have a unified voice, and as such, we want to lay the groundwork. We want to lay the foundation for policies in order to achieve this goal. So we defined 4 policies for this document. You know, first policy is regional transit with supportive infrastructure. This is highlighting the need for high capacity transit to connect to a region. The next policy we want to look into is new revenue sources. You know, we all know that the gas taxes is not enough to maintain our transit system anymore. So we want to start looking into new revenue sources to see what may be available. And then of course, we want to look into complementary land use. If we're going to be looking into new resources, if we're going to be investing into this high transit, you know, high capacity transit infrastructure, we want to make sure we get the most bang for our buck. And so we want to have complementary land uses where we integrate the land use planning with the high capacity transit. And then of course, as a region, we want our flexible revenue spending. We want policies that can address us as a region of how we can have flexible spending. You know, our allocations, if the money is allocated to our region, we want to be able to prioritize it in the way we want. And next slide, I think that's it. Yep, that's my presentation. And I have any questions, I can relay back to Paul. We have Paul Calabrese, which is a project manager in Broward, but I could play his role for now, and I can answer anything that you guys may have that come up. And thank you guys for your time and allowing me to be the first presentation after 2 months to the committee.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to try it.
Tawari.
Okay.
You did good. You did good. You did good.
A quick question. Any committee members have any questions you'd like to go ahead and ask?
I have a couple quick questions.
Okay.
The first one, have you thought of including the private sector for the funding? That's the first one. And if you have, which avenues have you looked at? And
yeah, well, if you look in the technical memorandum, that is one of the options because they're looking at various different funding options. So yes, definitely P3 and the private sector is one of the areas that they'll be looking at for funding.
Okay. And then also, have you done any research by going out and actually talking to the public about how interested they are in using the mass transit and I keep thinking of the environment we live in South Florida, where you have an average of 190 days of rain a year. And when it's not raining, it's just as humid. It feels like it's raining, or it's 95 degrees outside. So it's not very conducive to, especially maybe the elderly or certain people walking to certain distances to get to these transits. I mean, have you taken all that into consideration when you're looking at the expansion of all the transit?
No, definitely. That's definitely something we have taken into consideration. I myself, like, well, our whole team uses transit, and I'm exposed to the elements just like you're discussing. But I think the major issue is the funding. You know, we have like it's one thing that we want to prioritize it, but we want to be able to have the flexibility to put funding towards these projects. I think that's really the aim of the document, is to go to Tallahassee as a unified voice as a region to say, hey, you know what, if these are our transit priorities, you know, these are what we want to prioritize as a region. You know, allow us the flexibility to put the funds that are funneled to our region to do these things, to put the bus stops, to put the AC, you know, to increase funding for these transit type hubs. So that's really that actually addresses one of the main things that we want this document to do. I think Mr. George Corzo was speaking, but he's on mute. I see him.
Yeah, Stanley Rigo has his hand up. So if you want to go
sorry.
to Stanley and then George. And then there's also a comment from the one of the attendees, Michael Bello. So go ahead, Stanley.
Thank you. Tawari, great presentation. Thank you for that. I have a question. And I appreciate the high level presentation in terms of your delivery, but if you can go back to this slide where you have the Venn diagram.
Lisa, yeah.
So based on this diagram, how do you see you having the greatest impact? Or is it just showing us what your, you know, I see you've got partnership as an important piece in this, but what else should we read into this? Or are you just showing us how this all comes together?
Yeah, this is just me. I wanted to just put everything together and to show you our vision of how we actually came to this vision. Okay. That's really what this Venn diagram wants you to show. How we came to this unified vision, 3 TPOs, 3 MPOs.
All right, thank you. You kind of went fast on this, so I thought there was something else I needed to read into this. So
oh no, this is
fine.
Yeah, no, this is just me really wrapping up. I wanted to bring everything together because really, as I said, this document, it's really to show, because we're 3 different counties. We have 3 different funding buckets. D6 is who we coordinate with in Miami. D4 is who Broward and Palm Beach coordinate with in the north. But we really want to show that, hey, even though we have different funding, you know, you might think we have different priorities, but this is a coordinated effort and we're moving forward as one region with the same vision. So this document is really to, I guess, codify that and to really put that into black and white that, hey, this is where we want to go as a region. I know you might see us as different buckets because of how, you know, the districts are split up or the counties are split up, but this is really to codify or unified voice per se.
Okay, go ahead, Barbara.
Okay, I was just reading because I was looking at the bullet points that are. Hello?
Yes. So sorry. So I didn't mean to talk over you, Barbara. George has a question, and then we'll read one.
Okay.
Oh, okay. You can hear me. I've been having a difficult day technologically here, so my apologies for that. I have a question for Tawari. I mean, I guess it's a hypothetical question. Let's say that I'm a municipality that is looking to set up a new transit-oriented district, and you know, this presentation, I mean, you know, I see where we're going with this. You might be looking for considering new revenue sources, and you're going to be possibly looking at areas that have high density or that might be developed as transit-oriented development districts. Has there been any guidelines that would help integrate that into, let's say, the land development codes and things like that? Have you Has anyone developed some, how do you call those?
Well, that's actually a great question. I think this is the first step into influencing those land development codes. One of the things we want to do with this document is have policies that encourage and facilitate transit-oriented type development. That's one of the policies that we want to look. So this is actually, that's a great question. This would be one of the first steps in having influence on those land development codes.
Yeah, because if something like that is developed, then the burden would not be the municipality or agency considering this to develop its own or duplicate, efforts. So if some sort of a guideline.
And that's a great point, and that's why that is the aim of this document in that regional level. So you, as a municipality, wouldn't have to be the one developing that guideline. This will be coming from the regional level that, hey, these are our new transportation-oriented development policies based on our regional vision and our regional plan. So this is really this actually really addresses that concern directly.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay. I'm sorry, Kevin. I know we have another question from the friends of the committee.
Yeah, I was gonna wait till all the the FTAC members have finished if they're done, and then I see Stanley has his hand raised. Do you have a second question, Stanley? Okay, all right.
No, but I do have a question.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Well, I'm reviewing and listening. Now I understand that the three counties are working together, but the volume of freight and depending on the volume versus another county, how does that determine when you guys are putting it all collectively together when there's volumes that increase on one side than the coin than the other? Is it like an even split? How does that work when you're all pulling from the same bucket? If like the ideas are all put together and it's all coming from the regional area, but as a regional area we have sectors that are a little bit more congested or more voluminous than others, such as Miami-Dade County versus the traffic and congestion on when it comes to moving freight, because that's more what we're more focused on as a committee. Will that be touched on an individual volume basis when you guys are coming to regional decisions on that, just so we can understand how that's going to roll out?
Well, I know for the trip projects that is done. The trip projects, we don't have an issue because the trip projects, the freight project for Miami-Dade, it only comes from the D6 funding bucket. So when the D4 projects, which are the Palm Beach and the Broward County, they have to prioritize their projects. But we all do it as a region, depending on what's going to be best for the region. That's honestly how we go about it. We look at the various projects, we look at the impacts of all the projects, and we look at what's going to be most beneficial for the region. That's really our process for the trip project.
Okay.
But yeah, it's something that the RTAC discusses. It's a couple of different criteria that are looked at. It's volume, but they look at it. They have a couple of different grading criteria process. But we do look at what's best for the region when it comes to prioritizing those trip projects.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure I answered that correctly, but I could go to the actual FTAC board. I could go to Mr. Paul Calvarisi. I could probably get you a better answer for that if I didn't answer that as best as you wanted it.
No, I'm going to try to move my little speaker boxes to see if I can actually see the oh, I just lost everything. I lost the presentation now. Where did it go? Oh my God. There we go. Sorry about that. I lost the present. Yeah, I lost the presentation there. So my question is, because I see a lot of transit, but more for pedestrians and riding, and it's focused more on that. I don't see a larger substance for the freight portion of.
Well, the freight is more, we no longer, there's no longer a CEFTEC freight committee. The freight is more handled on the statewide level now. I think there's the MPO statewide freight committee. Am I correct, Kevin? How is the freight addressed now? Because I know it used to be under CEFTEC in the last plan, and the 2040 plan, there was a freight element to the RTP. But in this plan, there's no freight element to the RTP because I think the freight is more organized on a statewide level instead of a regional level now.
Yes, correct. It's organized on a state level, and I'm drawing a blank, drawing a blank as to the acronym, but it's through Ricky. Oh my goodness,
Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Ricky
Fitzgerald.
Fitzgerald's
Yeah, no,
office.
that's
Thank you.
the Florida,
Florida
the
Freight
Florida
Advisory
regional,
Committee.
right, which I was part of the committee for the first inception of it, which, you know, it's fine, but, you know, I just think that they should and need to work in tandem because, you know, we've had a lot of issues when it comes to freight movements and freight projects that have been bumped because of the pedestrian, because of the ridership and movement of, you know, vehicles, not trucks. So it just, okay. All right.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
I
Go ahead, John.
I think Mike Bello had a question, and I'll take mine after his. Did you say we had an audience question?
Yes, question from the audience was from Mike Bello. And his question, hi, great presentation. What stage is this effort currently in?
This effort, so this has been recently adopted August 7th by the CEFTEC committee, and it is going to the respective MPO boards in succession. So it's going to go to the TPO board in Miami in September. It's going to go to Broward boards in October, and I think it's also going to be going to the TPA in September. So that's the stage we're in for this effort right now.
I have a couple of questions. One is, of course, about the freight corridors. As Barbara mentioned, from a statewide perspective, with the Florida Freight Advisory Committee, I'm a co-chair of that. The state looks very much at that from the north down, top down, however you want to look at it. But they look to the areas for guidance. South Florida is easily left out of those. So to Artie, I don't mind mentioning to you because you're representing South Florida, but we're left in the kind of the tailwind of this whole thing. When they look at truck parking needs, we came out 5th in the state. You know that can't be correct because we have a terrible shortage in Miami-Dade County 10 years ago of 12,000 spaces. We had the last count in Broward County of 7,000 spaces short. That's either one of those is more than the entire balance of the state. As we start to look at a regional solution, I think truck parking is something that definitely needs to be addressed for a couple of reasons that you might mention to your group there. One is that a lot of the truck drivers down here, our estimates, and we're confirming it with a few studies, are that 50% of the trucks on the road are driven by local drivers. That means they're local residents, their kids are in local schools, they're local taxpayers, and they're local voters. I think all those things combined make them a group that really needs to be heard down here and accommodated. It's not just parking for over-the-road vehicles, it's parking for their rigs at night. It's parking for their trailers during the day if they need to unhook them. It's a number of issues like that. But because most of them travel between counties on a regular basis, I personally, just in my car, travel across the Dade-Broward line at least 3 times a day. I think it was a great remark that Mayor Jimenez said, the only 2 things you can see from outer space is the Great Wall of China and the Dade-Broward line. I think we don't really see the Dade-Broward line that clearly when we travel it all the time. So I'm wondering, can we look at that as a region, even though that has been passed back up to Tallahassee? They don't necessarily see us as an entity down here.
Yeah, I'm not sure what conspired between 2040, the 2040 plan and the 2045 plan. But I did, because I was updating some documents recently and I was speaking with the project manager, and they said, yeah, I guess the freight thing became bigger than the region, and they had that's why they have that new organization. But I could get back with the CEFTEC team and get some more information as to why the freight element was
Would you just, because really everything that comes out of Port Miami, unless it goes on a train, goes through the other two counties. So it's a chain, and that chain is only as strong as the weakest link. If we send something out of Miami and it gets into a weak link anywhere in the state, it's problematic for us. But it never
Yeah.
gets to the rest of the state unless we're careful. The other question I have is about looking to the future with this plan. Are you considering things that have really taken on a greater trajectory recently? Autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and the impact that'll have on the transit, on people's use of transit. If they can get into a smaller autonomous vehicle, an autonomous personal vehicle or a shared vehicle, what impact will that have? And also, what impact will pandemics have? I don't think we've seen the last of them.
Yeah, we within our scenario planning, we look at different scenarios that we plan for. But with this plan, we're looking at the most likely scenarios, and under autonomous vehicles is also autonomous transit.
Yes.
So that's still that falls under the umbrella. So we still, that still ties back to the funding or funding flexibility and how we can fund these, because autonomous vehicles will fall under that umbrella. So that ties back to the I guess the regional importance for having authority over where funding goes.
Thank you.
All right, Barbara, Stanley has another question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, no, just as I listened to what John and Barbie just mentioned about the importance of freight consideration in this, it just seems perfectly logical to us, at least. And you started the presentation with our population is going to grow to what was it, 29 million by 2030 or 2045?
No, 7.5 million people more by 2045. So 30% growth.
Right, and the trend has been that growth. We're going to see it in South Florida more than anywhere else. So if we're not including freight as a consideration in all of this, then the presentation and should clearly be marked for passenger only. So that, because it has to be. Well, maybe "has" is too strong a word, but there needs to be a strong consideration for the freight factor, the cargo factor in this.
No, and as I said, I from the research I done, the freight aspect of the document has been led over to a bigger committee. But Kevin, let's get back with Wilson. Wilson was a part of this last plan. I wasn't a part of this last plan. I don't know what conspired between the two plans. And then we could finalize. You can come back to the team and give them a more conclusive answer.
Okay. And then just to wrap up on that, the acronym we were thinking about before was the MPOAC's Florida Advisory Council Freight Committee. That's one we're thinking about. All right. So any other questions? And we can back to you, Barbara.
Okay. Thank you so much. We appreciate the presentation. Sorry for the bombardment when it comes to freight, but that's, one of our main focuses.
Well, actually, Barbara, I forgot to ask before I get back to you. So, Tawari, do you, in this and your other presentations to the committees, are you looking for resolutions or not?
Well, I'm doing it as informational items. If you guys, if the group wants to give a resolution that would help our case, I'd be certainly appreciative. You can make an amended resolution, to address this, knowing that this doesn't address your freight concerns. Mm-hmm. But this was really an informational item. But as I said, if the group wants to give a resolution in support, that would be sincerely appreciated from the CEFTEC team.
Okay.
Okay. All right. That would be an item for the board. If you guys are, let's put it out to the committee to make a decision. Or
You hear me?
we hear you now, George.
You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I believe that some sort of a resolution and support it should be considered by the board, and with a caveat that would be also a way where we can add that we're also recommending that the freight considerations be given, if not as a full scope of the report. There's got to be some connection there, like Stanley and I guess all the panelists were all the board was mentioning. So maybe we can consider such a resolution. I believe the presentation was amazing, and but there should be something, some feedback that it is our belief that consideration on the degree should be given to freight, and as well as to the development of languages that could assist governmental entities in incorporating these recommendations to their development codes and so on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other comments from the committee? Any other comments from the committee members?
Yeah,
This is
in
Juan
terms of-
Flores.
Go ahead, Juan.
I just want to kind of highlight what John Dom mentioned about the pandemic. I think there's been a lot of talk about ridership, and the gentleman Edmondson brought up the census as well, and the lack of people participating, which is the justification for the investment. So it all goes down to the investment component. So I think the group should at least acknowledge that as it relates to the future of this passenger and strategic alliance and the lack of funding and this whole pandemic thing, because it costs money to wipe things down and clean things, and I don't want to ride the train anymore because I might die of the pandemic and so on and so forth. So maybe something there, some sort of languages recognizing that, I think would be good. That's all.
John?
Yeah, and just lastly, in terms of the resolution that George had mentioned, I think it adds considerably to the strength of that to mention that it is a regional effort. It is the tri-county effort here of Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. And we would like to speak as a single voice from South Florida, that we need more attention paid to the freight corridors coming out of here, to the major issues of truck parking, and to some of the improvements that we're looking at for freight-only lanes coming in and out of the area.
Okay. Any other?
Sorry, quick question. George, did you make a motion for resolution? Just want to make sure. Or were you just commenting on it?
We need some help with the wording of the resolution. I think my thoughts were on intent. So yes, I'm proposing such a resolution to be considered by our board.
I just want to make sure, because that all discussion was going on, if it was regarding the resolution, and it was acknowledged that there was a resolution was on the table.
Okay, but my only concern about putting forward a resolution for the committee is that my fear is that a lot of this pedestrian and a lot of passenger vehicle wording, if it doesn't have the freight component already tied into it, and having that, how those transactions and that type of movement affects the freight, because the first thing that gets removed is a freight. So my concern is, I would like to add, Kevin, on that wording, is to make sure that it's any considerations taken for freight movements before any adjustments or removal or reduction of space, location, roadways, and stuff like that to accommodate additional pedestrians, whether they be bike, car, bus, and public transportation. I just think it's an effort, because every time we make a decision on whether it's rail or bus or bike lanes or any of that, it's taken away from someplace else, and that always gets taken away from the freight side. And right now we're scrambling for, freight is still moving during this pandemic. Freight is one of the things that isn't never going to stop. So it just shows that the importance and the strength of having that combined, making sure that, understanding that people need to get to and from where they need to go, but understanding that if, we cannot hinder any potential growth off for freight movements on the road. And that's my biggest concern about, that I would like to see something related that ties it in, because every time somebody makes a decision on one side, the other side has to give up something, and we're not giving up anything anymore.
Okay, before anybody else says anything, hold on, as waiting for Barbara to finish. If George, seeing as you did the motion before, any of the discussions could be occurring, we need to have a second on that motion. So is anybody willing to give a second on the motion, and then we can continue the discussion and vote on it if it gets that far. If there's no second, then there is no motion, and we move on. If there is a second, then we can go to the next step.
Can I expand a little bit on the comments made by the chair?
Actually, before you do that, George, we would need a second first. Somebody else would have to second your motion first.
Oh, I'll second.
I second the motion, Kevin.
Okay. I think I was Stanley. Yeah. All right.
Yes.
Go ahead, George.
I think that the points brought in by Freight are absolutely on target. However, I'm looking at this report more like the type of report, that is the goals is related to the Tri-County transit and mobility, and I believe that by having a resolution that says, we also look at freight, we're voicing our concern. But we need to realize what this is for, basically mobility on the transit. If we're considering, let's say, a freight study, right? And we are presented with a three-county freight study. I mean, the equivalent there would be to say, well, you need to address in that report pedestrians or bicycle, and everything had its place. I guess my point by supporting this, I look at this primarily as a report related to Tri-County mobility and transportation, and it's true that freight is a part of it. But I guess that by considering this ordinance, we're basically voicing that there's got to be some element of tying in the freight component, and they might be well done by an appendix, or it might be done by added reports and so on. So that's why I'm supporting this, even though that it was not presented to us as the type of a study that incorporated what the needs of, basically what we're here to advocate for. But I think that the resolution of support will make it clear that there should be some connection to freight as well.
Man, just so the team realize, Kevin actually did bring something up. Under the multimodal system and land use, they do address the freight, like the evolving freight demands in the plan. So it is a consideration in the multimodal system and land use objective. Just so the team knows.
And that is what we were saying before, that if some guidelines for incorporation into land development codes, there is what is important to perhaps say, well, how is it freight and goods are going to be moving in and out of these high density areas, and what venues could be there for cost revenue and to get some financial participation. So that's how we move these to implementation on land development codes is critical. And I think it's that's where freight would also could be a part of it.
I agree.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we have, Kevin, do you need anything else from our end? Or you'll,
I will decipher everything from my notes and from the recording. So if you're, and obviously, like I said, have to make one of the conditions be the freight considerations. We have a motion from George. Stanley seconded it. So if you want to go forward, we just need to do a roll call.
okay,
And as I mentioned before, for when we do resolutions and such, I'll call your name and you need to respond.
Kevin?
So, yes. Go ahead, George.
Should we be voting on this now, or should we draft the resolution and then you bring the resolution and then we vote on it? Would that
Yeah, I think that's better, Kev. Let's get some clarification from Wilson on the FTAC, because remember, as I said, there was a freight element to the 2040 plan, and they said that that freight element has been coordinated through a different group. So let's get some clarification for the group before we finalize the resolution of support, because you have a meeting next month, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be the best action.
Can we, I'm sorry, can we also get some more granularity on your presentation? It was a great presentation, but it seemed to be extremely high level. I have no idea what demographic you're trying to target by these improvements. I live
what
in
I could do is I
South-
could send you the plan, the full plan. I could send you the finalized plan, which will give you as more granularity in your presentation, if you will.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Perfect.
okay. All right, then Kevin, we'll wait for more feedback on the presentation and some of the questions, and then we'll at least have a concept of what we want to go forward with. So I want to thank you thank you so much for your presentation and answering all our questions. For the sake of time, we are at 3 o'clock, so we only got a short time. We want to make sure we get to all the presentations. So on to our next presentation item on the agenda is the FDOD truck parking engineering analysis, supply and demand from Carlos.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
All yours.
Thank you for the opportunity to present, and obviously to the members of the committee and friends of the committee. I'm going to make a slight correction. I believe we're going to go with the homestead.
Sorry, my bad. I jumped the item. I apologize. FDOT City of Homestead Freight Plan. I apologize.
That is
I saw
correct.
truck
I know
parking
you cannot wait to hear about truck parking.
I saw truck parking and I went right for it. Sorry.
No. Barbara looked on the page and there were 400 words on the page and she saw one word, and that meant that's
Madam Chair, I am also eager to provide the committee a brief presentation and documentation on truck parking efforts, but suffice it to say, we'll get to the homestead freight planning effort initially.
Okay.
Kevin, how am I doing with time? Is it we have half an hour or 1 hour to go on the meeting itself?
The meeting, anytime the meeting at 4 o'clock, so we're doing okay.
Okay, good. Let me know. So we're going to try to be brief with this presentation because we have, an extensive number of slides. We got about 40 something slides. But go ahead, next slide, please. So in the past, I've come to this committee, and I apologize once again that I'm going to try to brainwash it with our mission statement, but that's part of our core objectives. In the past, as I've said, I've come to this committee and I've kind of harped on the mission, vision and values of the department, and now we have 4 new core areas on for the department. This is from our new leadership in Tallahassee with Secretary Thiel. He decided to put some effort into creating these focus areas on improving safety. That's always been at the top of the list as an agency. Certainly inspiring innovation, fostering talent, and enhancing mobility. These are areas that are essentially the core elements of everything that we do. And I would we'll point out a couple of items in terms of inspiring innovation. A couple of years ago, and not too long ago, the department had no plans whatsoever building and undertaking transit projects like park and rides, or even truck parking facilities. That is changing, obviously. And if my memory serves me correctly, I was out here back in May talking to you all about truck parking, and specifically Golden Glades Truck Travel Center, which is a project that exemplifies innovation, and not necessarily on the technology side, because we have some technology elements in there with TPAS, the truck parking availability system, but also on the project delivery and the fact that the department is getting into the business of developing these types of facilities. But go right ahead. We're going to try to be brief for this presentation, and I'll turn it over to Jack in a few minutes. But let me just talk a little bit about the agenda, the effort itself. The next slide actually has a listing of all the freight planning efforts that we've done in the past. And just to refresh your memory, when I came on board about 5-6 years ago, I devised a strategy to look at the entire county. Now we find ourselves with this new freight planning effort in the area of Homestead. We're going to follow up with the Monroe County effort, and then we're going to take a look at the entire county once again. But suffice it to say that the purpose of these freight planning efforts are definitely freight focused, of course, and they're designed to identify freight mobility strategies at the project level. What that means is, look, we're trying to come up with tangible solutions with these efforts. Certainly they're planning level assessment, but I'll tell you that the work that we've done going back to 2015 is making its way through a project delivery cycle with some of the recommendations in the town of Metley and even the city of Oaxaca. So we're making progress. Next slide, please. I'm gonna, make sure that when we turn it over to Jack in a few minutes or so, that we hit on the highlights on growth. I think that would be one of the areas that perhaps we want to describe the existing conditions or area that we're studying in the city of Homestead. Growth, there's certainly a potential for growth. But one thing I would point out as well is that these freight planning efforts have had, very, very similar scope or instructions, right? They're actually based on planning and conceptual engineering, scope of services or technical instructions to conduct the studies. So they do rely on very similar approaches and the analysis. We'll look at existing conditions. We'll look at our transportation network. We look at some potential cost estimates for our recommendations and so forth. So same thing with schedules. They're normally about a year, maybe a little longer sometimes, 18 months to complete some of these sets. So this one is scheduled to be completed by the end of sometime March of next year within our current fiscal year. And one other item that we've added is a truck parking piece. Sorry, we'll get there in a second, but it's part of the truck parking efforts at the county level, and I'll get into a few more details once we get into the next presentation. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jack Smetler, our consultant project manager from Atkins. And Jack, if you will, see if you can be brief, hit the highlights on growth and in the existing conditions.
All right, great, Carlos. Am I coming through okay, Kevin?
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
And I'm fine with video, but it doesn't want to seem to go on. I don't know if it's locked out, but I'll go ahead and proceed. So, one of our key components of the study is stakeholder engagement, and we're getting ready to ramp that up. Next slide. It consists of these different components. We have a list of stakeholders, a lengthy list that we've identified that represents the South County community, as well as other freight mobility interests. And we'll be conducting outreach interviews with those folks beginning shortly. We're also going to set up a freight study advisory committee with 3 meetings that kind of parallels what we're doing with FTAC. And that's a group drawn from our stakeholders who's focused on the South County area to interact with us as we go through the study process. In addition to that, we're going to have targeted outreach workshops, again, those members drawn from our master stakeholder list. That's going to include folks focused on the freight logistics side of interests, South County trade groups like the agricultural and tourism and military folks, and then of course the public governments, the two cities, Florida City and Homestead, and Miami-Dade County for the unincorporated areas as well. And then we'll be doing selected briefings to elected officials at the two cities. We're anticipating at their scheduled meetings. And then of course, as always, FTAC, the FTAC committee, 3 presentations, and this is the first of those, to give you a status report on our efforts to date. And then we'll be back with you 2 more times. Next slide. So a quick profile of the study area conditions. We've gotten through that fairly well. This is the map is a view of Homestead downtown area in the foreground, looking northeast, up kind of along US 1 up towards the downtown area. So it captures our primary study area, which I'll show you in a second. You see on the far right, the runway at Homestead Air Force Base. And as you pan across to the left, you get into the Redlands and the agricultural area. Kind of a quick cross section of the study area. Next slide. So our primary study area is outlined with the black dashed lines, and that's basically the urbanized parts of Florida City and Homestead. And you see in green there the urban development boundary, which restricts the development of lands outside of it. And so our primary study area is pretty much consistent with the UDB boundary. But we have wrapping around it a secondary study area, which comprises the primarily agricultural uses, which are part of the original economic foundation of the South County area. Next slide. So some quick bullet points on the study area. It's their origins and historical basis in the agricultural economy there. But it's evolved to serve as a lower cost bedroom community to the rest of the county. That role is gradually changing, but that's been historically another dimension of the study area as a home base for employees who work elsewhere to the north in the county. And part of the reason for that is the lower land values, but those are starting to gradually rise, but they're still among the lowest in the county right now. It does have an existing industrial character to it in spots, but relative to the size and density of Miami-Dade's core freight and logistics trade, north of 836, it could be characterized as secondary right now. But it's poised for significant growth over the next 25 years, as we'll see in a moment. And again, the UDB is an important factor shaping how that new development will occur. We're anticipating it'll be more dense and vertical. By vertical, I mean by South County standards. You'll see a little bit more 2, 3, and 4-story stuff as opposed to 1-story. And we anticipate the area may evolve to look like a small scale Doral, with the freight uses somewhat intermixed with the residential and commercial uses, building on kind of the existing pattern. And the graph just shows you that the far South County area is climbing the growth curve and is poised to have a period of accelerated growth over the next decades. Next slide. A few challenges. There's few trunk access corridors, the Turnpike and Chrome Avenue and US 1. Again, we have neighborhoods intermixed with freight. The UDB is going to influence how things develop. There are hurricane storm surge and FEMA flood zone areas given the low elevations in parts of the study area. We do have a railroad serving the district, but as we'll see, it's an underutilized asset right now. We're a long ways from the rest of the county. That's a good and bad thing. And then finally, a challenge is going to be the amount of proposed growth, as we'll see momentarily. Next slide. In terms of opportunities, we're in a position where we can anticipate that forecasted growth. So that's a good thing. The network appears to have reserved capacity except for those trunk corridors we mentioned. We do have the Smart Plan South Transitway corridor coming in soon, as well as a bus express rapid transit service on the turnpike, so that the long distance commuters will have an alternate choice in terms of how they commute northward. The rail corridor is there, and it may present some options. As the area grows larger, it'll reach a critical mass and maybe be more self-supporting in terms of freight and distribution activities. And as that happens, as South County gets more congested over time, the way in which suppliers service the Keys may change, with a shift down towards the South County as a gateway to to Monroe County. And then there's some funding and incentive zones down there that may come into play as well. Next slide. The area, was dramatically affected by Hurricane Andrew decades ago, defining moment, but the community has rebounded and growth is back moving upward, but the storm effect still persists. This is a view showing on the left a newspaper account from back in '92 in Florida City by the water tower looking west. And here you are years later with a new water tower. And you can see that those blocks behind it are starting to redevelop, but not fully redeveloped. So it's just a long, slow process. But it's safe to say that you can't really see the effects of Andrew like you could for quite a while after the original storm. Next slide. Homestead is the second oldest city in the county, amazingly, after Miami. And it's followed right behind it by Florida City. So they've been there for a long time. Economic anchors of the South County are agriculture, ecotourism, the military, more recently NASCAR. And there are emerging industries that are finding South County attractive, and we'll get to those in a minute. And then, of course, the bedroom community role of the South County. Next slide. A big element we wanted to highlight is the Homestead Air Reserve Base. After Hurricane Andrew, there was a redevelopment plan prepared for the base. My firm Atkins was the lead on that master plan, and I was involved with it also decades ago. And the lands, there was a certain part of the property preserved for military use, and the rest of the land was deeded over to Miami-Dade County for economic redevelopment. The map shows that most of that land has been allocated for various uses. The yellow outlined areas, there's two of them, are unallotted areas that are still under Miami-Dade County control. And the pace of those designations has picked up. So it's while it's a big facility, the land available to the county for redevelopment is diminishing. We've been talking to them about that. Next slide. There's a FedEx center that's been developed. Amazon is looking to come in right next to the FedEx center with a 1 million square foot distribution facility. And then there's a 100-acre steel fabrication facility. The deal is still pending on that, but it looks like it's going to go forward. Like I said, there's some available land holdings left. There's a Department of Labor site that for job training that hasn't really matured, and a school site that's on hold right now. And then possible expansion of the military presence there. Next, so the base presents an opportunity possibly for truck parking. We're looking at that. Another recent project in far South County is the Atlantic Sapphire Salmon Farm, about 6 miles northwest of downtown Homestead, right on the edge of the Everglades National Park. They're getting ready to ramp up production this year, and it will increase up to a steady state 220,000 tons per year, according to the newspaper articles. And they're going to package the salmon that they're going to raise. It'll be ready for retail sales. It'll leave prepackaged. looking at 60 employees at the start, and we're estimating around 8 truck trips a day at the start, but that would quadruple over time to the steady state of 250 employees and 40 truck trips a day, plus some other truck trips for packaging materials and other supplies. So a significant activity. It takes the place of a tomato farm that was there. Next slide. So growth forecasts, as you'll see from some graphs in a second, the area is poised for significant growth. And I'm going to go from the bottom up. The South Planning District that the TPO uses when it does the Long Range Transportation Plan is showing around a 50 to 60% increase in the South Planning District. That's roughly south of Kendall Drive and southwest 120th Street. So it does include a lot of the developed part of the county below the Dadeland area. Within our study area, somewhat similar numbers, but as you move into incorporated Florida City and Homestead, you see Florida City more than doubling in population, a 50% increase in employment, and Homestead around the 80% mark for both population and employment. Next slide. So graphically, you see here in the two diagrams, 2015 and 2045 on the right, and you see more darker colors on 2045. That represents the added population, which there's still some open land down there, but there will also be some infill and redevelopment. But it's spread across the area pretty much within the urban development boundary. And a lot of it's east of US 1. Next slide. I threw in these graphics from the previous long-range transportation plan for 2040, just a different way to depict the projected population growth in South County. And on the right, you see in proportion to the rest of the county. The forecasts for 2045 are a little bit different, but the large patterns are still the same. So you see from the coloration in South County, a significant amount of growth anticipated down there over the next couple decades. Next slide. Population growth, this shows you the delta, the change in population. And on the left, you see where the added population falls. And then on the right, you see how the population density changes. And it shows very well that we're confined by the urban development boundary with that new population. Next slide. Similarly for employment, the employment growth is not as dramatic. The area has fewer jobs per capita in the South County than the county at large. That will change somewhat, but not dramatically over time. And you see again, the urban development boundary contains that growth. Next slide. Same graphics from the 2040 LRTP. And again, it shows you the share of South County and employment growth that's going to occur, and it is sizable. Next slide. Same diagrams as for population. The employment change, the darker red colors there on the left, and then how that employment density per acre changes over time. And so you see the concentration of added jobs inside the urban development boundary. Next slide. We took a look at job commute patterns also using census data. And rather than, I'll interpret the diagram for you. Of the jobs based in the study area, about 50% are oriented towards areas not so far. You see those clusters near the study area. And the other 50% are fanned out across the county. The only concentration that was large enough was the city of Miami. The rest of it's just, a little bit everywhere. And the reverse pattern isn't as strong because the job count in South County is not as robust. Next slide. A little hard to see here, but daily traffic volumes, I'll just tell you that the highest volumes are concentrated on the Turnpike and US 1 and Chrome Avenue, and a couple of the east-west streets such as Campbell Drive. Other areas have more modest volumes, but we do have a grid network for the most part, which helps with the dispersion of traffic. Next slide. Truck volumes parallel the patterns on the previous slide, with the highest truck volumes on the Turnpike and parts of US 1 and of course Chrome Avenue, and a few secondary east-west roads that you see there like Camel Drive. Next slide. The percent truck volumes what we were surprised by is the percentage of trucks is relatively high. It looks like parts of central Dade County, which is interesting. And that's, I think, currently because in proportion with all the agricultural tracts to the west, there is some general truck traffic everywhere. And the population base isn't large enough to dilute those truck volumes. So there's still currently a reasonably strong share of the total. Next slide. South County has its share of traffic signals. I'll just leave it at that. Next slide. We have the CSX railroad track that comes down through the center of our combined primary and secondary study area. We have 11 at-grade crossings, but basically the track is in poor to fair condition, hasn't gotten much maintenance, and freight traffic this far south is fading right now. Most of the traffic is, the customer base is north of our study area, what's left of it. So it's a latent opportunity. Next slide. Level service, we'll have better graphics for the report, but the worst congestion is on Chrome Avenue, US 1, and the Turnpike, which are the commuting corridors for South County. A few other east-west streets also experience some spot congestion near those trunk corridors, but the rest of the network is in pretty decent shape. Next slide. In 2045, those kind of conditions persist. Despite the growth, a lot of the network, according to the travel demand model, isn't overstressed once you get away from, again, those trunk corridors. And this reflects improvements to some of those trunk corridors as well. Next slide. Crashes tend to follow the traffic, and so you see the downtown Homestead area is the bright white area, Chrome Avenue going straight north, and the diagonal is US 1. So no surprise here in terms of the crash history. Next slide. So quickly, there's 20 program projects in the long-range transportation plan for South County. The one on Chrome Avenue is nearing completion. There's 7 capacity projects along the Turnpike, 6 transit projects. I mentioned the busway and the express bus rapid transit on the Turnpike, and there's 4 park and ride lots. And the other 6 projects are scattered minor roadway capacity projects. And you see that the improvements are front loaded by phase, by period 9, 8, 2, and 1. So the good news is that the projects will come sooner, but the bad news is there isn't much in the outer years. We'll get to that in a moment in terms of our approach to analyzing the network. Next slide. I'm going to skim over these 4 phases of the LRTP, but you see the 2 main transit projects here and a Turnpike improvement, as well as the completion of the Chrome Avenue project. Next slide. Another Turnpike capacity project and park and ride lots and a few other roadway improvement projects. Next slide. One more Turnpike project, capacity project, and then a county road project west of Homestead. Next slide. And finally, the final Turnpike capacity project on the main line there. Next slide. So to the transportation network analysis, which is kind of the core of our study effort. Next slide. We've identified 4 planning scenarios. Our baseline is the adopted long-range transportation plan under the cost feasible network that is the projects I just showed you. Our trend needs plan looks beyond the adopted plan to see what other projects would be desirable to address all of the remaining capacity issues that we can't afford with our budget. And then we stress test the network beyond that with the moderate growth scenario, and we increase the truck traffic by 20% and by 40% to test the network and see in case that the industrial market over responds relative to the forecast, what kind of problems would that create on the roadway network? And so those are our 4 scenarios that we're going to be looking at. Next slide. A variety of improvement actions will be on our agenda besides basic roadway network capacity and minor access and circulation improvements, infrastructure and intersection improvements like turning radii. Carlos mentioned we're looking at truck parking facilities. And we want to consider the agricultural industry needs. There's the idea of freight staging, for the Florida Keys, and then are there possibilities with the CSX railroad corridor? The railroads made no secret that they're open to selling to the right buyer. They'd like it to be FDOT. They have experience with selling part of their railroad segments to FDOT for Tri-Rail and Sunrail up in Orlando. But nothing's cooking on that front right now. Next slide. And then the truck parking analysis, next slide. As Carlos mentioned, that's part of these sub-area studies. And so we assemble relevant data, identify candidate truck parking sites by screening our data sources. And then those prospective sites are screened once to narrow down the set of candidate sites. We get rid of sites that are incompatible with land uses and other constraining factors. And then those final sites are reviewed qualitatively and also quantitatively in some respects to shortlist down to the final best sites. And then conceptual layouts and cost estimates are done, and that's all compiled in a separate truck site analysis document. The results of that will feed into Carlos's countywide efforts, where he's looking at all of the candidate sites from his various sub-area studies into a consolidated analysis of the prospects across the county. Obviously, a site in Homestead that's 25 miles away from 836 isn't going to attract that market, but there's a lot of territory in South County, and because of the growth, there's the prospects that there's a market there for truck parking as well in the South County. Next slide. A variety of kinds of sites we're looking at as unused public land over at the air base. NASCAR is open to some possibility at the racetrack. We're looking at other properties, outside the urbanized area that'll be identified by screening, and then possible redevelopment of underutilized industrial parcels. So those are all in the mix. Next slide. So our next steps, next slide, are basically to continue. We're wrapping up data collection. We deferred our traffic counts because of the virus. That was FDOT policy back in the spring, but that's starting to open up now. And for our schedule, we need to move forward. So we're going to do some initial counts to compare to historic counts and see if there's an adjustment factor that's involved with those. So we have identical locations. We're looking at 9, and then we'll move forward with the balance of the data collection and get that caught up with our existing additions analysis. Also ramping up our outreach on the interviews and the workshops. And then the truck parking, we're moving ahead as fast as we can on that to get Carlos our results to feed into his countywide analysis. And then continue working on our basic core assignment to look at network improvement alternatives. Compile those after the first of the year and wrap up the study by March and April of 2021. I think that's it, Carlos. Yeah. So appreciate the time to be before you. Welcome to the new committee members and the carryover members, and we're happy to present this report to you and look forward to getting back before you again a couple more times. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Any questions, any concerns, any feedback?
No? A question and a comment, if I may, or question, a couple of comments. First of all, yes, truck parking down south for sure. Definitely, desperately, completely needed. My question goes with one of the bullet points you had about the agricultural shipment strategies. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, we haven't had the opportunity to talk to the agricultural stakeholders we've identified. We'll be doing that soon. But it's just to see if there's some possibilities of shared shipping strategies. You know, in the old days, the farmers brought their products to a couple of distribution centers, one in Florida City and then another one further up the railroad tracks. And a lot of that stuff went up. This is in the old days of railroad service. And some of that stuff went out by rail, even upstate. Those days are long gone. But you know, it was kind of like pooled shipping. And now most of the producers, as we understand it so far, you know, are shipping their products to South Florida distribution centers further north in the county, or to you know, their dedicated suppliers to certain outfits like Cisco and others. There's another whole tier of produce distributors, you know, who are servicing restaurants and institutions and the general commercial market. So the distribution patterns have changed, but we just want to explore that and see if there's any opportunity for some efficiencies there. I think it's an uphill push, but we just want to kick over the rock and see what's there.
Are you going to include the horticultural?
Yeah. So when I say agriculture, I'm talking about you know, the products, fruits and vegetables that are produced for the consumer market, but also the nursery operations that are substantial out there. FTAC had the opportunity right before the virus shut things down to have a site visit out to the Costa Farms area, which is north of Homestead, about 5 or 6 miles out in the Ag District. And so, yeah, we mean both.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes, Stanley has his hand up, as does Rose.
Okay. Stanley?
Yeah, hi. I'm just more of a comment. I was going to point to the fact that it seems as though Costa Farms should be on that presentation too, just because of the growth and the amount of logistics that they do. I think the committee had a chance to visit the Willie's operation, and it's pretty substantial. But it's good to know that you're also, that's also part of the study and analysis. You know, what I'm seeing, and I'm lucky to work on several of these projects, the Amazon project, another member of my team that did the Atlantic Sapphire project as well. But what we're seeing is that you're exactly right, that the Homestead area is beginning to develop somewhat of a logistics cluster. And as you look at the growth in population, it just makes sense that there should be a homestead. What is this called again? The homestead. What is it? Improved growth.
Freight improvement plan.
Freight improvement plan. Thank you. The question, I know John knows this really well too, is that it almost seems as if this was going to happen no matter what, because land is so scarce right now that you can only go south for more land. There's really nothing left. So it's good that you're moving in this direction anyway, but it just seems like it's the logical step, given how scarce land is from an industrial perspective. It's the logical space, and that's where we're seeing a lot of the site consultants that we speak to. They're eyeing Homestead in a way that they've never done before, and these are big companies that have distribution operations. So you're right to anticipate a lot more, logistic operations south of 8th Street. So that's good. The other comment I just wanted to make on the presentation, I'm not sure if it was this one or the one before, on the incentive piece. I see that you had enterprise zone and I think it was free trade zone. And I think when you say free trade zone, you're really you're referring to foreign trade zone. And I just wanted to make sure if that's what that was. And also if you knew that the enterprise zones have sunsetted, I believe it was June 30th. So they may come back, but at the moment, those are no longer available, incentives for enterprise zones.
Yeah, we're aware of your second point about the enterprise zones, and it just didn't get picked out of the PowerPoint. And then regarding the foreign trade zones, yeah, I guess, the versus free trade zones, sometimes the terms are used interchangeably, but I think technically they're called foreign trade zones. You're right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Rosie, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question and a comment. Jack, Carlos, great presentation. It was very detailed and gave us a lot of information. Thank you so much. One question that I had was, on one of the slides it said emerging industries. Would that be the FedEx and Amazons that are looking into that area, or is that already been determined that they're definitely going into that area?
Our understanding, well, FedEx is there.
Okay.
And our understanding that the Amazon deal has closed, and they're going to wrap around the FedEx site. But when we said emerging, and those are obviously strong indicators, the freight logistics trade. But there's other uses showing up. For example, the salmon farm. It's kind of not what you would expect there, but they found a very desirable condition with the brackish aquifer down low and the freshwater aquifer up high, that they can get their water supply from the upper aquifer and then discharge it into the lower aquifer. And they found that intriguing in terms of their site searches, basically all over the world for a facility like this. So that was one thing that drew them to South County. And then there's a proposed steel fabrication site at the air base. So I'm saying those are, are one-offs, but there's being more one-off projects identified for South County. And so they complement the straight freight and logistics kind of development that we think will have more of a critical mass this time. I didn't say this in the PowerPoint, but basically the South County planning area that the TPO uses for the long range transportation plan, that its northern border is around 120th, north of the Kendall Executive Airport, and it jumps up to part of it runs along Kendall Drive and then drops back south. So it's a large area, but that whole area right now is the size of 2 Tallahassees, and it's projected to grow by another Tallahassee in the next 25 years. So that's the scale of what's happening across the entire South County, and that's accentuated the further south you go, you're going to see a higher rate of growth.
Jack, Carlos, one more thing. With your presentation, and you folks are the specialists on this, one of the business channels recently had, and I think it just came out yesterday as a matter of fact, that on a daily basis, Florida is seeing 1,000 folks moving to Florida from other states up north and from the west. I guess my question would be, of those 1,000 folks moving into Florida on a daily basis, they're averaging between 20 to 25% into the South Florida area, which hence means more freight, more traffic, more movement of freight into this area. Has that been taken into consideration in this? Have you folks added some of that information that's just recently come out in the last two months of the amount of folks moving into? Is a mass exodus into Florida right now?
I would say yes. The long-range transportation process is managed by the Transportation Planning Organization, and they coordinate with the other 2 counties in South Florida on their growth forecast. We were part of a work order with the TPO that helped generate the population employment forecast and distribution for input into the LRTP. And so there's a statewide forecasting effort. It comes out of one of the universities, and then the counties then look at our regions look at the distribution of that population employment across their region, and then Miami-Dade County in particular then looks at its share across the county in terms of long-range forecasts per those diagrams that I showed you. And so it's done in coordination with Broward and Palm Beach County, and it does reflect that. 1,000 persons a day, that's back to the old rate that we used to experience pre-Great Recession. It was the steady state number was 1,000 a day, and I wasn't aware that we were all the way back to that now.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up, because I just saw it yesterday on one of the business news channels, and they were saying that it's already been documented, especially in the real estate where houses are going up, and in 3 days it's already sold. And the majority of the bulk is coming to the West Palm, Broward, and Miami, and even Monroe County, which I was surprised. But yeah, I wanted to share that with you and ask you if that was also taken into consideration. So the figures are up, definitely back to what it used to be. I thank you for the presentation. Very informative. Thank you.
Okay, and I've mentioned the long-range transportation plan is updated every 5 years. So if we make gradual course corrections in that outlook, every 5 years. So we're never too far off. It's an ongoing process.
Thank you. That's all.
If I can just add one little thing, 2 seconds, Jack Carlos. I don't think you guys actually came to the Costa Farms visit. If you would like to set something up, just reach out to me, and I'll gladly give you a look around.
Thank you, Willie. I did have the opportunity to come out there. Obviously, I used to look much different back then. That's why you probably don't remember.
It's been a few months. I think we all look different back then.
It's the COVID-19.
I guess I'll just mention one thing here that might be valuable from a real estate perspective. We can't really predict the future, but the Miami Association of Realtors, which is probably the largest in the world now at 53,000 members in Miami, is looking at a trend, which is movement towards areas that have single family homes. The COVID virus kind of pointed out that it's hard to put multiple families and multiple generations in a condo. You run out of parking spaces when people are all there at once, especially. It was possible to do that 6 months ago, years ago. You could kind of create shift in a condo or an apartment building. Now you just can't do that. Now what you're realizing is you can have multi-generational housing. You can have multiple families in the same house. And of course, our demographics here are not small families. It's a Latin population. It's groups that don't have one child, they have multiples. And often, like my own family, people end up coming back to live with them when their relationships don't work out. Homestead is one of the few places you can do that. And I think what we're seeing now is our estimates are much higher than the estimates of the demographers that are basing it on the past. We're basing it on trends of what we see taking place within the last 6 months. And the trajectory is really accelerating there a lot. Also, the other side of this is what we have talked about that everyone should be aware of, that land is $1 million an acre when you get north of 836. Right now, about 90% of all the industrial property in Miami-Dade County is north of 836. That leaves only 10% south of 836. Of that 10%, 90% of it is north of 200th 8th Street. So you really see what the opportunity is headed south. The issue is, like Jack mentioned, the trunk corridors. How do you get in and out of there? Or, as Amazon kind of proved to us, is it important to get in and out of there? If you're just down there to serve the population, it could be that Homestead turns into something like Weston was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, a guy named Gerald Thompson lost his seat on the Broward County Commission for supporting 595 and the Sawgrass Expressway. They called them the roads to nowhere. Actually, it was 30 years ago. Now, of course, you see that those are communities that the office space, the housing is just as expensive, if not more so, than downtown. People pay extra money not to have to drive downtown. So it's something to think about as we start to look at what the future land use is, as George mentioned earlier, how we accommodate that, and especially things that we need now, like truck parking. To buy them when it's affordable is going to be much better than waiting for it to be up to $1 million an acre. That's my thoughts for the day.
All right, I know we have some questions pending, but I want everybody to be cautious of our time. We're running pretty behind, and we still have 2 other presentations. So I know that Kevin, you have a question from the friends of the committee. Do we have any other committee questions right now or comments for the presentation? Okay, Kevin, do you have a question there?
Yeah, we have a friend, Daphne Spanos, who's on the attendee. She's going to be switched over to the panelist so her voice can come through. And Barbara, I also sent you a message through the chat if you look at it.
Oh, I just saw it. Okay.
Okay.
Because we are running close to the time, and I know that we have 2 more presentations, and both of them are like, oh, I want to really hear what you got to say, Carlos. Do you think you have time to do one
no.
or no?
No, he's gonna do them both next month.
Okay.
Yeah, if I may, Madam Chair, I'll be more than happy to come back and give this due attention. I realize you have some additional business to conduct, and I will defer to the committee to take the last 10, 15 minutes to conduct your administrative.
All right. Well, we appreciate that you coming back. I'm really, that especially issues with the cargo terminals is something that I'd like to hear, and then the truck parking, because I still have to talk to you about the possibilities of what we're doing at my end. So with that said, we're going to go back to the committee to approve the amendment of the agenda. We're going to move items 6 and 7, or 7 and 8. What numbers are they? 6 and 7, 7, 8.
7 and 8.
7 and 8 to next month's meeting, so we can go ahead and have time to go ahead and close out our new and old business, because we do have a few things that we need to cover because we are coming into an election year. So do we have a consensus from our board from our committee to go ahead and amend and remove those 2 items for next month?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. We're all in agreement on that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
All right, so then Daphne has her question to ask you. Ask the committee. Go ahead, Daphne. Please unmute yourself.
I think she just sent it.
Yeah, I don't
She did not have a question. It was a mistake. I think she just said.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right. Well, then with that said, the next item on the list is old and new business. So we want to go ahead. I'm going to turn that over to Kevin on the attendance reports, attendance appointments, and commission election cycle, and next meeting date.
Okay. All right. So the attendance report you can see on the screen. We've had two months where we didn't have a meeting, because usually, of course, we meet 11 months a year. This year we'll only have 9 meetings. That would mean that each of you would have to attend a minimum of at least 5 meetings out of the 9, and that is not an issue right now for any of you, so it's not a problem. Rosie, in your case, the bylaws require to be in attendance for at least 50% of the in the scheduled meetings. So with this being your second meeting, there are 2 more for the year. So as long as you attend the October and the November meeting, you will be okay attendance wise.
Cool. I'll be there.
All right, because 2 and 2 is 50%. So that's just so everybody knows that you can see in the fine print on the bottom of the sheet. It has to be more than 50%. Okay, Lisa, go ahead to the next slide. The one after that. Right, here we go. So, as you know, last month, August, we had some elections here in Miami-Dade County, and in that we have some of our commissioners who are either term limited and or running for other positions. So the names highlighted on the screen there that you see, Barbara through Barbara in District 1. I did not notice that before just now. Stanley through Eileen Higgins in District 5, William Morrow through Danielle Levine Cobb in District 8, and Rosie Martinez through Joe Martinez, no relation, in District 11. In the case of specifically for, in case of Stanley, there is not a concern, and neither is there for Rosie. For Barbara and for Willie, Danielle Levine Cobb, as you know, is running for mayor. If she's elected, then the District 8 slot becomes open. So once that term is over, which is November 17th, everybody, by the way, then your assignment to the FTAC would end at that time. So if you want to keep on, is to try to get in contact with any of the other commissioners who are vacant slots, so that you continue on. Of course, I want you to continue on, and then you just have to request that they have you appointed effective November 17th, so that therefore there is no drop off. So for that to occur, that would occur by, if you're able to get that approved at the October board meeting, then there is no delay. If not, then you might end up missing a meeting or so, that's happened before. It's not a major issue. I think John had that same issue where you had to miss a meeting. And for Barbara, as you're being the chair, same thing. We have 2 people running for that office. So the same thing would apply to you. Whoever the election day is November 3rd, and as I mentioned, the last day is November 17th. So whoever wins that election, it'd be best to get in contact with their offices and so forth to have them reappoint you for that position, or you can in the meantime check with any of the other members, board members who have vacant positions, to see if they would be willing to appoint you. So, okay. So we have 2 right now. So we have a chance that two of you will be moving around and hopefully seeing you when November, December comes around. And hold on one second.
Can I reach out to send you an email? Is that okay? So you can guide me on how to contact these other.
Yes. No, I will give you. I'll give you all the information separately. I just want to make sure, know for the record, that what exactly is going on. I'm going to be doing the exact same thing to my other meeting next week, so everybody knows that their particular positions are, how it works. Because as you know, when you came on, it says as long as the person who appointed you was there, that's how long you're there. So. Yep. Okay. And I think I said. Commissioners, I meant to say board members. I'm sorry. All right, and then our next meetings, as I mentioned, it would be for the FTAC would be October 14th. Does anybody have any questions?
Nope.
No? Okay. All right, so I'll send you the information, Barbara and Willie, offline, so you
Okay.
can start the ball rolling on that.
No problem.
Mhm.
All right. With that said, do we have any members that didn't have a public comment at the beginning? Do we have any member reports or anything that we'd like to go over now? If not, then that means we actually finished and wrapping up an adjournment on time. With that said, I'm going to thank everybody for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you at next month's meeting. And stay safe and sanitized during this craziness. And have a good rest of the afternoon. Adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Alrighty.
meeting
Okay.
adjourned.